healthier that way. You know it's not healthy to hold in your farts?
I didn't, but I do
Toxic
now.
poop.
Thank you, Warb.
You remember that on a 20-hour drive, all right?
Learned that from a very educational show called South Park.
Okay, well here we go. So last year we did a sharpening video, and in some manner or fashion I was like this. So if you see that, like that on a thumbnail on the Hunting Public channel, we did a pretty deep dive on elementary sharpening. Most people don't consider sharpening. We all live in a kind of a plug and play world. Your car is supposed to work and you don't know why it works and think it like it's magic. One of the most crucial things you can do to increase effectiveness and getting your animals down is making sure your broadheads are sharp. If you have a package that says that they are hunting sharp, you should probably check them like that, because I got those last year and
Not sharp enough.
well, yeah, when I pulled them out of the package, I literally went, and licked the thing because it was dull, and then I fixed that. So Warb and I are going to discuss some of the stuff that he's learned from me, and one of the things that was really encouraging is all you guys are talking about it now. Beforehand, it was just get whatever broadhead, you put it on there, and certainly it's going to work. But we took them to the next level, and it's really helped the whole industry. So aside from bows and arrows and stuff, the only thing that kills a deer is that. It's not your stabilizer, it's not your release, it's not your nose button, it's nothing. The bow doesn't kill a deer, although if you've dropped your bow and killed a deer, put in the comments below, hurrah for you. At the end of the day, we'll say 99.8% of the deer are killed by the broadhead. If it's dull, it will not lacerate anything. And then there's a secondary piece behind that, which you saw last year when you broke the humerus on that deer. And then we saw a couple of times in different scenarios, the broadhead's got to survive impact. When Warb shot that deer, and I did a quartering 2-shot series on his shot and a bunch of other stuff that they did, he did it on his own and talked about it, that the broadhead broke the bone and still was sharp enough and could put the deer down at 50 yards. If your broadhead is dull, it may still break the bone, but it's still dull. And it may not cause lacerations to put the animal down at 50, it takes 250.
Well, yeah, you can just say on the flip side, that broadhead that I shot didn't survive impact, and I don't know if my shot placement was good on that deer. I don't know, we don't know where it was at, but that definitely didn't help, I'd say.
Like I was telling you a while ago though, when I shot that deer, I don't know if it was with this exact head or not, it was one of these two heads, I forget now which one. But when I shot that deer and I pulled this thing out and we were gutting him on the beach, and I reached in there and pulled it out of his scapula on the offside up in his cavity, the thing was still really scary sharp. There was no ding in it, there was no bend in the tip.
Right.
The arrow broke, but the insert and the broadhead was in great shape after going through snapping and cutting a bone and lodging in another bone. That's the first time I've ever seen anything like that with a broadhead. We've killed lots of deer and then picked up the broadhead on the other side of the deer and it was just mangled.
Traditionally, what I've seen with the thinner bladed stuff is the blades are messy. They're chewed up and stuff. So some of those are skipped off a rock or hit the ground. Have that. But when you shoot right through one, like out here, if you shoot through something, it's dirt.
Right.
In the hill country of Texas, your arrow's skipping off a freaking piece of limestone. God knows what happens, right? But when you shoot through a deer, or if you were, let's just say you bury it to the fletch and they run with it and go down, you know that that broadhead only hit the deer. And you should be very, very cautious if you get the... You should not be more elated that your deer's dead. Your second thought should be, what does the broadhead look like, and is it shredded? Okay, you got that deer in hand. Fantastic. You punch your tag in whatever state. What about the next 10? Yep. You just need to look at the blades and go, if it's shredded once, I got my deer, fine.
Yeah, but you gotta also take into account if it's shredding your blades, if something inside the deer is shredding the blades on your broadhead, you don't know which part of the deer did that. Because if upon entry it hits a rib or it hits a bone in the scapula or the humerus or whatever, and that's what causes that chatter in your blades or your tip to bend or your bleeders to fold up, if it's that initial entry point, you've just severely lessened the cutting ability of your broadhead before it gets into the good stuff on the deer.
Correct. You've taken away its effectiveness.
Right.
I've seen this outcome based, but I can't prove it yet, but me and the Rocket Man are going to figure this out. I'm pretty certain when I really started focusing on really big pigs and I started passing little ones, I stopped shooting everything and started hunting big pigs like a big whitetail. And I literally was probably 50%. And these guys can attest. These are short shots. They're right there. It's not like it's freaking brain surgery. It's not very dynamic. I could set when I shot pins, I could set them at 17 and hunt for a year. It's just the way we do it, right? You make fun of us or whatever, but I'm pretty convinced after going up in steel quality to something that's, S7, like the new Tough Head Evolution, or the Cutthroats got really good steel. We have an iron wheel here. Okay.
These are all single bevels. That's a Magnus.
And then the Stinger is the first broadhead I started shooting when I was just exploring and had no idea, and I dared to put a 125 grain broadhead, and I dared to put 100 grains in the front. I mean, it was like I was going off the rails. This broadhead started torching stuff. And I started shooting them and having more confidence when I went out. I used to go out and go, God, I hope I get one today.
Right.
I was shooting a lot. It wasn't, I hope I get one, didn't see anything. I was getting them right there. And when the big boys come, they're usually pretty convinced they're not going to die. And I would shoot in half an hour and then they run off. And it was always the long night, or we accidentally found them, and sometimes you got a blood trail. Right?
Yeah.
Then I learned to sharpen.
Yep.
And then I went up on steel quality.
Right. That's the thing I think it's real important for all you guys to know. When you increase the quality of the steel, you go to a single bevel, heavier head with just more steel in general, it's going to increase the durability of your broadhead and what you can shoot through. But Rocket Man's up. Got the toilet flushing.
That's good for video right there. You're supposed to edit that out, but we're not doing it.
Yeah, but that's why I didn't see any damage on this head. If I would have been shooting something that was 100 grains that had really super thin blades, even if they were surgical sharp, if the steel wasn't super high quality and wasn't super thick and durable, it probably just would have totally destroyed that broadhead when it tried to go through that bone.
You need to be thinking more about your broadheads being a breaking bar with really sharp edges than a cutting tool. So they are a cutting tool and they have to cut. I got that. You have no idea what those things are going to hit. And they may have to break stuff. Come on down, Rocket Man.
I hear talk.
I like talk.
He's up.
So you need to think more about broadheads as what they can do as a breaking bar than that is really sharp, rather than a really sharp instrument that's going to hit everything soft. You've all cleaned animals. You've all tried to cut bones when you're a kid with a knife. It doesn't work real well. What Warb and I are going to do is we're going to talk over the top of a lot of the things he's learned. I'm going to play with the strop, and then we've got a couple of gizmos.
Yeah, I think we ought to start off by kind of grouping these broadheads into a couple different categories as far as cut-on contacts that we've had experience with. This is, what are Magnus Stingers? 40 bucks? Yeah. 30 bucks? Yeah. Something like that?
40, 42, somewhere in there.
Yeah, for 3 of them. This is your common broadhead. It's distributed all over the place, and we've had good luck with them thus far. It's just a standard double bevel head. This one's got bleeder blades. Some of them are serrated edges. Some of them don't have bleeders. Right. You can go to the Magnus site and check out all the different stuff that they've had. We've had great luck with them. What are you shooting? Hornets?
Yeah. You're shooting both.
Yeah.
You're shooting BOF.
Yeah.
Both of them.
Yeah. So these are a great, affordable option if you're just getting into the cut-on contact stuff. If you're trying to go to the next level and you're really investing in something that is super plan B, as you would say, that can break bone and continue to penetrate through, then you need to start thinking about single bevel stuff. And that's why we've went to those. You shot the grizzly stick stuff. What else? Or mainly that?
Grizzly sticks, and then I tried to get something more affordable, and that didn't work out. So.
Oh, right on. I got you. So he shot grizzly stick stuff. I've shot these cutthroats. He's got the tough heads over there, and we can attest to what these things can do in bone at this point. Either one of them works. But just be conscious. Like, I have never tried to shoot this through the humerus of a whitetail yet. I don't know what it would do. I think it would probably work.
I'm not recommending that shot.
Yeah, but that type of a shot is what a single bevel's for, because of the way that these things operate. When they go in, to your point about levering, these things are designed to twist, turn, and snap the bone. And when it does that, it reduces the amount of drag on the arrow shaft as it goes through. And I think that's why you're able to penetrate through bone and break that stuff.
Absolutely. So bones are relatively fibrous. They're not very hard, but they are a superstructure. So your house, or if you've ever built a table or anything, done any woodworking, and you build the table, the first 4 legs go up, and then you put the frame around the top, and it's wobbling. And then you put a piece of plywood on top, and it gets tighter. And then you put 45s under it that are this long, and you just butt those in real fast, and the thing stiffens up like crazy. Animals are the same way. Skin has a certain amount of leverage on the animal. The muscle is on the outside, and the muscles go multiple directions. You know this from butchering stuff, right? Then the bone, then under the bone, especially under the shoulder, there's a rib cage. There could be a spine under there. If you shoot high enough. So you have the superstructure you're shooting through, armor. It's multiple pieces going multiple directions, and it does not want to come apart.
Right.
So if you take one of these broadheads and shoot it through your house, don't tell your wife. It's going to hit multiple things, or maybe not. You could hit the 2x4 and stop. You could shoot right next to it and shoot right through sheetrock and go right out the house. That's exactly what deer hunting is. You need to be planning for the 2x4, and if you miss the 2x4, everything works. Most things really do well. I got that, but it takes a pretty slick dude or dudette to shoot between the ribs every time.
Yeah, so, and I guess before we get into the sharpening stuff, one last thing on these 2 different types of broadheads. It all depends on your situation that you're hunting in. Everybody tries to generalize this stuff and then, paint us into a corner like...
it's not possible.
And you may be a whitetail hunter that hunts private land, that hunts over food plots, and the average distance of your shot is 28 yards. With us, the average shot distance is what, 15 maybe?
I shot my furthest deer ever at like 25 yards last year. That's the furthest I've ever shot one.
Okay. There you go. And I think I've killed maybe 2 deer beyond 25 yards.
Really?
Out of all of them.
Oh,
The majority,
that's awesome. Yeah.
majority of them are close range,
Right.
super tight. And what I found over the years is I end up in some tight quarter situations with bucks, when at times they may be slightly quartering too. And instead of aiming back off of the shoulder, I have tried to increase my setup that therefore I can aim at the vital V, and if I miss and I hit those heavy bones in the front, I want something that can break those bones. And I feel very confident that my setup can do that at this point. But remember, taking shots that are 15 yards and in like that, the deer's not going to move. I can put it right on the point and drive through there. Greg, on the other hand, in that last video we did, he's shooting shorter arrows. He's shooting lighter poundage. He's going to take broadside and quartering away, which is awesome. He loves this head, and he's killed several deer with them already. I'm just using that, throwing that out there as an example. Just take that into account when you're choosing a broadhead, and think about the types of situations that you wind up in the woods and whatever you're in. Don't just say like a whitetail hunter is a whitetail hunter, because it's all different no matter where you're at. I mean, there's some people like John Eberhart, he hunts 30 feet up in a tree.
Yeah.
And even if he's shooting a deer at 10 yards, he's 30 feet in the tree. So the distance of travel is pretty dadgum good ways.
Right.
And then if you look at Zach, he hunts almost exclusively on the ground. Guys like me and Jake and Ted, we hunt like 50-50 a lot of times. Jake doesn't hunt high. If he's hunting in a tree, he hunts 12 feet up in the tree. All these things are factors that may come into play with your arrow and your broadhead setup. So keep that in mind whenever you're selecting one. We're just trying to let you guys know, honestly, what they're capable of doing. Sharpening is something that you have to learn to do when you go down this route, and I just learned to do this from him last year. One thing I've learned when it comes to sharpening these single bevels, I want to preface this first, because I think there's a lot of people that are diving into this realm that have no idea what they're getting themselves into as far as sharpening. These things, the cut throws, are super hard steel.
Absolutely.
Super hard.
Yep.
And when I got them out of the package, they were not nearly as sharp as I wanted them to be.
Yep.
So I had 400 grit sandpaper, and I was just going through just sheet after sheet after sheet trying to get a burr. And it was taking me forever to get a burr. I was using one of these little Stay Sharp jigs. This is kind of your poor man's broadhead jig, if you will.
Yep.
He's got the Cadillac over here that he'll show you in a minute.
Yeah.
On the tough head.
KME self-aligning sharpener. So you clamp your broadhead in here into these jaws. Okay. And when you roll it, it actually can rotate around and keeps the bevel even. You don't have to mess with it. It just goes in. There's a ton of videos on their channel, on KME's channel, and there's videos all over YouTube how to use this, so we're not going to show you all the details, but pretty simple. You don't cut yourself. You put your broadhead in the sharpener. You go like that. Tighten this up. And then it pops through here. Don't cut yourself, don't bleed. And there it goes. And then you just start running.
This is something you gotta learn to do if you're going down this road.
There's no, you don't have an option.
You don't have an option.
And then the second thing is, one of the things that's been encouraging watching you guys, now that they're confident sharpening, I see lots of broadheads getting shot. And you have to shoot your broadheads. I don't care what you buy. If you go fixed blade, even I would fling it. If you're going to shoot a mechanical broadhead, I'd fling it out there and make sure it goes where you say it's going to go.
Yeah.
You have to shoot broadheads, and you're actually better off shooting more broadheads than you are field points. They are not the same aerodynamic gizmo on the front as a field point. That's the Rockin' Man. We've just done a bunch of videos with him, and he's telling us about lift and yaw and roll and all this crazy crap. Stuff nobody cares about, but it matters. Nobody cares what the Rocket Man says, except it really matters. So then we gotta care. So when you put a wing on the front of your system, you need to check to make sure that they are flying where they're supposed to fly. And if they're not, you need to keep working at it. There's a ton of time to be invested in sharpening. It's an art. It's an art that's required, and it's so overlooked nowadays. It's terrifying to me. And I'm going to say that after I've only been really sharpening for 4 or 5 years. So before that, I was happy-go-lucky. You know, just get my little package of broadheads and just go deer hunting. But I described earlier the amount of, the lack of success I was having on well-placed shots. So the assumption is if you fire your broadhead out there, it's going to survive. And so that's why we're making this, discussion around really sharpening your broadheads.
Reality is a lot of them don't survive.
No, that's
that
right.
are out there, and we hear it all the time. And I used to think this myself. We were just touching on this, but to elaborate on it slightly more, it's like when you shoot your broadhead and you kill the deer, and the broadhead's mangled, and you're like, hey, I still got the deer, so I'm just gonna screw another one on there and go about it. You're not taking into account like where that thing got mangled in the process of it going through the animal.
They really should.
If you pick up your broadhead on the other side of the deer or in the deer, and that sucker is still sharp enough to kill another one, you know that it was sharp when it went clean through there, and it cut the maximum amount of arteries, veins, capillaries, whatever else is in there.
It
did the maximum amount of damage.
The number of variables when you don't know if your broadheads are going to survive, if the blades survive.
Yeah.
It's not good enough. It really should. You should really have a thought in your head if the broadhead blades are just trash. And we've all seen it back in the old days with the .025 screw together broadheads. I shot them for years. The first head that really started surviving for me at a pretty good rate was the Thunderhead. And I'm old enough that the Thunderhead was a new thing. It showed up. We were like, wow, that's a pretty cool way to do things. We had, Bear Razorheads and everything before that.
Right.
But I shot some other brands of broadheads that were screwed together. They were straight, they flew good, and the blades were always wrecked. And it's gonna cost you one that you hit right, and then the blades are wrecked on impact, and he's not the damage internally, and it's another 150 yards, and they jump the fence, or they go in the crap, or they go through a swamp, or it just lengthens the more variables that the deer can go.
We already discussed last year sharpening these things. We did a bunch in that video on sharpening, your standard double bevel cut on contact.
Yeah, so
heads.
look in the description and hit the link on that.
We talked about single bevel some, but then I got a lot of experience working with mine last summer because I took one of these heads out of the package and I started running the jig with it with 400 grit sandpaper, and I ran through 8 sheets of sandpaper before I got a burr. And then I finally got a burr and I peeled it off, and then I went to 600 grit, did it again. And I mean, it took me a couple hours over the course of 3 or 4 days, sharpening 30 minutes at a time to get that thing really scary. Now, granted, I don't have a lot of experience with it, not near as much as you do.
That's key, right?
And I just had, I had 400, 600, 800 grit, 1200 grit, and I was just working my way up. And I eventually got it really sharp. But just remember, if you're gonna go this route, especially with these broadheads that are super hard steel, you're gonna have to spend a ton of time sharpening them because it takes a long time. If you don't have that much time or want to put in the effort to do that, that's the guy. You can get these things, these come out of the package super sharp, and then you can just take them to the next level fairly quickly and easily with a sharpening jig, leather strop like what he's about to show you, and you're good to go. But that's the one thing I'd caution folks with the single bevels.
So once you've gotten to the point that you've got a jig system, okay, and you've got it cut down and you've got it pretty sharp, I recommend a strop, and then Warb's got a piece of cardboard back there.
Cardboard. This is the finisher here, guys, and this, I think this is super important.
It really is.
Like, because this is when I noticed major difference. I ran, I don't know, what is this? 220 grit sandpaper here. You can run your broadheads with a jig over stuff like this. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on that because y'all can watch the video we did last year and learn how to do this stuff. You can run through that and spend a bunch of time getting these things fairly sharp with sandpaper, or I've even got diamond plates over here as well. They work just like sandpaper. I mean, there's a 400 grit and that's an 800 grit. You can see that. It's works the same way as sandpaper does, basically. But you can run the gamut of all that, get them really, really sharp. But then when you start using a leather strap, or this is just cereal box cardboard that I learned from Bron Kulas. He gave me this tip with buffing compound on it. You take these things to a new level. Yeah. And it's, you were telling us this last year and I didn't realize how well it worked until I started putting it on here. It's like the blades shined up.
One thing I said last year that I want everybody to get in your head, at impact your broadhead will never sharpen. It will never improve at impact. So whatever level of sharpness you have is all you're gonna get. The example I used yesterday was, if you have a moderately sharp, say you're doing trim work and you're using really thin wood and you have a moderately sharp blade on your saw, and you see the hairy edge, or when you have a, you forgot your PVC cutter so you just had to use a hacksaw.
Yeah,
but it's ugly.
Hairy, yeah,
you can see the hairy edge, right?
PVC pipe when you cut.
The biggest thing would be the difference between, should have brought them, is the cut with a pair of PVC pliers that actually are designed to cut PVC. It's nice and clean. But when you see that hairy edge on the edge of a piece of wood or on the edge of a piece of PVC pipe, that's exactly what has happened on this thing at a microscopic level. All the strop takes that little microscopic stuff off the blade's edge, and it makes it a homogeneous cutting edge. There aren't teeth. If it's like this, like a jigsaw or chainsaw blade, when it hits soft tissue, muscle, fat, sinew stuff, it will get in and it will caulk. It will literally grab meat and it'll be holding on in there. When in your body and everything's airway system, the arteries get down to the cellular level. Well, not the arteries, the veins in the arteries get down to the cellular level. The cells are actually in a line and allowing oxygen to jump on board. This is just a fact. If you can cut to the cellular level, we're talking microns, look that word up, it's a lot, small. Then you've exponentially increased your damage level. So if you just cut through some lung and you just cut a major airway off, and that's all it does because it's dull, and it only cuts the big stuff, sure, your deer may die. Mm-hmm. But if you hit it kind of wonky in the lung somewhere or one lobe, but it cuts every little tiny little thing, we're talking about exponential. We're talking about 10 times the factor of things that have been severed. And there's arteries and veins through the whole system. Every little thing you can touch, you don't know which one is super lethal, but when there's a level of magnitude there when a million of them get cut. Literally, it's that dense in there. Millions. So you don't want certain things to ride over and certain things to get cut. You want everything getting touched. And that's why when you get down to this level and get that sharp, let's see if this thing's sharp at all. I think it might be. Been playing with it. Okay? When you get down to that level.
Oh yeah, that's right? What you want.
I didn't really put out much effort there. And that's newspaper. All right, so the goal is for this to be really, really slick. So what I did was I roughed up one edge a little bit on sandpaper, and it feels, you know what it feels? It feels a little bit rough, sharp, and it bites into my finger. It doesn't feel real smooth, but it's sharp. And I want you to listen to this. hopefully we can hear this. See how it's grabbing? You see that grabbing? And once it gets going, it starts cutting. Listen. You hear that sawing? That's not what you want. That is when it is probably won't shave. It is probably hunting sharp, but you heard and you see in the paper, you see those jagged edges and stuff on there? See where it jumped right here? Yep. That's where it's catching. That's what we're discussing. That's the teeth grabbing onto it and tearing it, right? In this case, you would think, hey, a tear is good, it's going to shred more. No, it's going to grab some gooey stuff. There's a ton of stuff in animals. Most of it is very elastic and wants to tear apart. It's going to grab on there and ride along like feathers on a wing. You're gonna, you want the bone exposed, right? Whereas, where did I lose it? Those cuts are
straight,
very straight and clean, right?
So how do you take it to the next level on that strop? That side, you've got one side there that's dull. Yeah, I mean, you can see the side with the burr. I can see all the, look at all the little pieces of paper on it. Can you see it, Ted? Yeah. Like the little hair that's on there? That's not good.
Oh yeah, y'all can see it, huh?
Yeah.
I'm going blind. Oh no, I can feel it though. So you often can just put your thumb this direction and push up. Don't cut yourself, but and I can feel, it feels like this at a microscopic level, and it's pushing against me. And that's got to come off. And a strop, now these are available at toughhead.com, and then you can get them pretty much anywhere. There's a lot of vendors that sell strops, even wide open on Amazon and stuff like that. This is the rougher side. I would suggest you get one that has a rougher side. This has got aluminum oxide paste in it. It's really pretty dirty right now. It's supposed to be bright green, but see all the black? That's actually steel that's in there.
It's grabbed off broadheads.
Right, and you have to clean your strop every once in a while. I'm not going through that. I'll do a video on my channel someday about that, but there's a million guys with sharpening channels for knives who can show you how to clean a strop. It's really pretty straightforward. And then this side's really slick and hard. You can see when I was learning how to sharpen, how to use a strop, these chunks taken out of it. That's bad. Don't have those. But that's the learning process. You can see on the edge right here, I've chunked it off because it's just a learning process. It is what it is.
Yeah.
So I will take that. I don't know if the strop will cut it, but we'll see. So we got, this is the rough side. And once you get through, right, that's the real rough bird off side, okay? This is not a super critical angled thing. You will not change the angle drastically with a strop. It's too soft, but it will take it, it should take that burr off of there. So you're just going to feel the bevel. So Ted, let's hold it like this, okay? You're gonna put the bevel here, and you can see that space under the broadhead. Can you see that through the camera, Ted? There's a little, I'll do that. Yeah. Okay, if you see this space here, and then when you rock it up, it sets. Yep. That's the angle, and you can feel it. I understand from the sharpening dudes that it's better to be a little high, because if you're low, you'll never get on the edge. So you're better off being a little high. I'm not talking about high. I'm just talking about if you're going to do, lean into it. And so you just kind of feel the bevel. And you see this right here? See that skin right there? Mm. That's the burr biting into the leather. If you see that and you think your broadhead sharp, that's the teeth I was talking about that are hooked on here, right? They're hooked like that, and they're dragging. You see it right there. See that run? Yep. That's bad. So we're going to keep going, and it just got better. You can still see it pushing a little bit. What you really want to see, at my angle, it's real shiny this direction, and I can actually see that I'm getting nice, even runs. And then when I did that, it started pulling back, and it means the burr rolled back over. You're just gonna have to watch some videos, spend some time on some sharpening channels. It's the only way I did it. And I got a strop. The big Mike Tanaka started banging me on the head about doing a strop, and it was the only way I could figure it out. And then you just have to put in the time. So then I mostly, you saw that I did like 5 strokes on the main bevel, okay? And then I worked on the backside, just a few strokes. I'm not worried about it this much. Okay, and then you can just get to going. And you can see that I'm not being super critical. I don't have a jig, okay? Let's see what that did just on the rough side.
How much pressure are you applying to the...
I'm just pushing on it a little bit. It's moderate. I would call it moderate pressure. So, there we go.
Getting better.
What I saw there was it took off. And what I mean is right here when I started, okay, it kept, before, it hung, popped, and then went, okay? Now it's running right off the start, but it's still making a little noise. That is a hunting sharp edge. I would be confident to go out in there, but why not? Take it to the next level and make it as sharp as you possibly can. So we're going to go to the hard side. And once again, we're just going to feel the bevel. See me wiggling it around. It's a little bit extreme, you know, it's for example on camera, but I can feel it right about there. And this side is real light pressure. Just keep it even. Okay? You don't have to be super exact. This is a polish. 8 or 10 strokes. And we will see if I know what I'm doing. Survey says still not there. Almost. But that's pretty sexy. So I'm just going to go faster. I've been doing this a lot. You can see how sloppy. I don't know if you guys are all probably, guys and gals are probably too young to ever gone to a barber, but I was always amazed that they stropped like 800 miles an hour on that big little piece of leather. That was, most of the great strops in the old days were horsehide. There it goes. Just, it was next level. So before, it would grab and bite and wrinkle the paper and then take off, right? Now, right at the get-go, it just takes off.
That's what you're looking for.
Right, because now that's the level it's at. I promise, be careful. One thing I'm going to be damn serious about here. One thing I did to myself was, the first time I did this, I stopped shaving my body. I started using newspaper. And then the first time I actually got it this sharp, I put it on my arm and I pressed as hard as normal and I took a piece of my freaking hide off. I mean, it cut my skin. I went, oh, and I walk in and Julie's like, well, you're bleeding again. Mrs. Fowler does not even, I walk in, like, with oil on my head and transmission fluid. And she's just like, another day outside in the shop. But I actually was used to the dull broadhead I had before, and I went like this, and I filleted a piece of my hide off. It was itchy. And just, you know. So be careful when you get them really sharp. And then
don't nick your bowstring with it.
Every time you go out, if you bang them around, if you use them, and you're sitting around with your buddies at night, lying to each other, which is fine. This is why we go hunting about half the time. Get your strop out, and while you're lying to everybody about how great you are or whatever, strop. Get you a couple of pieces of newspaper and just make sure they're right. So if you dropped it or 2 of them fell out of the quiver, they get dinged, and you're sitting around for 3 hours before you go to bed.
That's a real
10 strokes.
tool.
10 strokes. Right? 10 strokes, yep. Or cardboard.
Well, so that's what I learned last year sharpening these cutthroats was I had to spend a bunch of time on that high grit sandpaper to get them sharp. Mm-hmm. But once I got them sharp, all I had to do was just maintain them. That's and right. This is what the strop and the cardboard and like a 1200 grit diamond or 1200 grit sandpaper. Mm-hmm. That's all I was using to maintain them.
Right.
Cereal box cardboard is your poor man's leather strop. This is just the back of, I don't know, some Special K that I took apart. You can buy buffing compound at a hardware store. I don't know, they sell it.
I get it on Amazon or whatever. I get it as cheap as you could. It's all the same stuff.
Yep, it's the same stuff. You just take it out of the package and you rub the buffing compound on there, and you can see how I've got it on this cardboard. Like, there's just enough hairiness on the back of the cardboard to kind of grab that compound. You can see the black streaks in there because of where I've been running that broadhead. And I just took the same jig and run it across there one direction. You can see the streak as it's coming down. Essentially doing the same thing that Troy just did.
Barely touching it.
Barely touching it. I just did 4 strokes, and then I'll pull the burr with 1, 2 strokes.
In those jigs, it's easier just to leave in the jig. And
Yep.
if you're gonna test
This one's might not be that sharp
No, that's
because I
fine.
just
No,
grabbed it for an example. I mean, you can test it if you want.
I'm just gonna use it
But
as an example.
as it's getting sharper, you're putting less pressure on it.
Of course.
And like by the end of it, I'm not even putting any pressure on it. I'm literally just pulling the jig across the cardboard, and it's just applying down pressure.
And that's what you do in camp.
Yep, that's what you do in camp.
You just buff them up and make them right.
You buff them up, and that's literally all you got to do to keep them in good shape. As long as you're not shooting them into stuff, which we don't do that. I take 1. If I buy 6 of these things, I take 1 or 2 of them, and that's the one I practice with. And the rest of them I just keep sharp. The only issue with these and with some of these broadheads is if you don't take real good care of them, they'll rust, like that one. That's one that I've neglected seriously. And now I have to do a ton of work.
That's because the good steel is high carbon.
Yeah.
So you may have to get to the point that you actually oil them a little bit.
Like when we got here last year, he made us get our broadheads out of our quivers, and he picked that thing up, and he's like, okay, let's get this going. And he would run them through that stropper a little bit. If they were bad, then you'd get out your diamond plate or your sandpaper or whatever and get them sharp. But if you stay up on this with a sharp broadhead throughout the fall or whatever season you're in, you can keep them sharp.
I've said it a couple times, but the broadhead kills everything, so it might as well be the best tool.
It's doing the same thing. Like he said, the backside of that is dirty because it's full of metal shavings. When you look at this, you can see that buffing compound's white, but you can look on there and you can see that shiny black dust.
That's all those teeth coming off.
That's the teeth coming off. Yep, it's doing the same thing.
This
is what you got to do if you're gonna go. That's why we're doing this, is to tell you guys there's a lot of folks that are real, that are getting into single bevels, especially after watching these videos that were breaking bone and all this stuff. They're cool and we like shooting them, but it's an investment of your time to learn how to do this stuff whenever you buy them, especially if you've got one like this with really, really hard steel. Once you get the edge set, though, it's great because it holds the edge.
It's easy to.
And I'm assuming it's the same way with Tough Head.
Yeah. Once the edge is set, the Tough Head's come pretty darn sharp. Mojo does a good job. But once it's set, you shouldn't have to re-sharpen the whole thing. You should just be able to touch it up. And then one thing I want to talk about very quickly, and then we'll be done.
We might as well stay on the single bevel train here because there's lots of questions about that.
So I have 3 pieces of wood. This is trim board that I got out of my house. This represents a 40-degree bevel. This represents a 30-degree bevel. Remember, the bevel would be this way, but okay. And then this represents a 20-degree bevel. And Dr. Ed's been talking to us about that the bevel itself, I put duct tape on these. Here, put them like.
There you go.
So I put tape on this just to make it very clear. This flat edge represents this whole edge setting like that. This is a tool and an inclined plane. So most people talk about angle of attack this direction, right? Ed's example is always, you want to have a wheelchair ramp that's really slow sloping because it's less work to go up it. Same way with a broadhead. You want the angle of attack to be pretty low. The part that Ed says we're missing is that this is a tool and it has leverage in this direction. Okay?
That's what breaks the bone.
That's what will break the bone. This bevel is twice as long as that one. Probably better this way. If you're breaking things or you're using a pry bar or a breaking bar, or you got a nut everybody has a cheater. I got one at home that's 3 feet long. It gets used a lot. I had you did shocks on my big truck with a 10-foot cheater bar when you were like 7. And he was like, yeah, I got this, right? 10-foot cheater bar, and he weighs 60 pounds, and he's cranking these giant bolts off my F-350. And he thought that was the greatest thing in the world because he had leverage. So here's this tiny little 60-pound kid with a 10-foot cheater bar cranking off a 21-millimeter bolt that's rusted to crumbs. So what that gives us is leverage when the bevel rotates. More to come on this, right? There are some 40s. Around 30 is the most common single bevel. And then Wojo brought out the 20-degree bevel. And it has a humongous surface area for the bones to press on. So that's 20. That's 30. You see which plane has more surface area to press. And then the final thought on this is, in the cutting direction, this is super thin. It's just that much more of a surgical thin blade. That one's a little fatter, okay? And this one's like a, you know, it's just more blunt. It's very difficult to sharpen the 40s. It takes a lot of work. Whereas the 20 to 32 range is really pretty easy for average people to sharpen and get sharp and stay sharp. More to come on that. The foundation, we're going to study this stuff and make sure that we're not going to collapse the blades or going to roll over and that kind of thing. So there's always, as you go thinner, you're risking this out here. No one's done it. Wojo's had this head's the first one out with a 20-degree bevel. We broke a pig's spine with it, was the first thing I shot with it. My buddy Chris shot it right through the spine, exploded, and the blades did fine. You had one chatter a little bit.
Yep. The tough head.
Yep. But we don't know if it was the animal.
Probably hit a rock inside.
Because you buried it a foot in the ground.
Yeah.
So that was not conclusive because it didn't catch in the animal and stop. So that's just a little bit on bevels. And one of the things that's fun about hanging out with Dr. Ed is he knows so many things that he comes up with these ideas and says, man, you ought to show some boards or something. But once again, when we're trying to use a pry bar and break something hard, that's a pretty self-explanatory thing. You got a toothpick that long, you got 6-foot 2x4, you got Thomas's 10-foot pipe, and he's cranking the freaking truck up, you know. So that's just a final thought on the single bevel strategy there. But it's a ton of time. You'll get better. What happens is in the beginning, so don't do this 2 weeks before deer season, start emailing me saying, hey Troy, can you speed this up? No, I can't. It doesn't go faster. And then you'll get better and you start to feel the edges and you start to feel the steel coming off, and there's certain things that are just fed back to you when you start working with it, and your hands and everything, it's like throwing a baseball, you get more accurate and stuff.
You have to pay close attention to the burr on these things because that's what you're trying to get to. The burr's that tiny little thing that rolls over the blade as you're pulling it across there. You know, you're eventually creating a burr. We talked about that on last year's video a lot, but I didn't really grasp the scope of it until I got into actually sharpening these for myself. Because I would sharpen and sharpen and sharpen on the one side on a piece of sandpaper, and I'd keep feeling for that burr, and I couldn't feel it, and I couldn't feel it. I'm like, man, how many pieces of sandpaper do I gotta go through before I get this? I'm like, am I doing this wrong? Is it in the jig the right way? Or am I screwing this up?
Were you using a Sharpie?
Yeah,
okay.
I was using a Sharpie. And it was wearing that Sharpie off of there, but I still wasn't getting a burr quite so much on the other side. After about the 8th piece of sandpaper, I started to feel it.
So
and you can
likely,
feel it catching. Like that is a good, he shows a good trick on that video last year where you use your fingernail. Like say this is a piece of 400 grit sandpaper, and I don't have it in the jig, but I would. And you sharpen it across there. I mean, maybe you're going like this, but you're sharpening the bevel either way. And then after you do it 10, 15 times, using the inside of your fingernail to peel up on that blade. And right before you crest the top, you'll feel it start to catch. Once you wear that Sharpie off and you get the blade set where it's nice and even, you'll feel that burr start to catch. And then when it starts to catch, that's when you flip the head over. You can hear it on there. You peel that burr off of there. And that all that's doing is taking that burr that's folded over and it's straightening it out. It's making it sharp. You can go overboard. You can turn the burr back over onto the bevel side.
Yeah, sure, of course.
Which you, like you said, you have to practice this stuff. I didn't ruin any heads doing it because this stuff is so tough.
Yeah.
But it took me way longer. Like the first head, I experimented for hours with that thing before I finally got it. And I was just going back and forth, and I'm worrying because I don't have it in the jig right, or is my table level and all this stuff. My brain's just, you know, fried.
Right.
Which is why you got to be patient. You got to spend time doing this. Don't buy them a week before season.
Here's one more example I'm going to try to show. I think this will work. Ted, I don't know if you can see that flat on the edge of this bevel. I'm trying to make the point that this is not cut through. So when you've been sharpening like crazy and the bevel looks pretty good and the Sharpie's worn off, I don't know if the camera can see, I've intentionally put a flat edged piece of metal against my bevel. And this is an example of why isn't it sharp? I've got all the Sharpie off. You haven't cut through this flat that's on the edge and you can't feel it. And we're talking, it's tiny, it's, you know, microscopic differences. So you'd have to cut all the way through this flat right here. That's an example of, hey, my bevel's clean, the Sharpie's gone, but it's still dull as a hammer. That's the deal. You just got to keep going. Yeah.
You got to keep going.
Mostly it's work like on the bevel side.
You will feel it once you've went far enough. That was my biggest hang up was like, man, I went through 7 pieces of sandpaper. I ran this thing over it 200 times, and I still don't feel the burr. Well, 2 more pieces later, and I had finally cut through it.
Yeah.
But that's just a testament to how hard the steel is, and you know, I was running it 5 or 6 times and looking for it. But you're right, you got to cut through that thing, and then once you cut through it evenly, you'll feel the burr on the backside. And then once you take that burr off and you feel it again, then it's like the light bulb goes off. It's like, okay, now I can move to my 400 grit, my 800 grit. And once you get the burr on there, it's fast, relatively.
Yeah, absolutely. And just covering the edges real fast.
Because once you have the burr, you have your edge. So I would go from a 400 to an 800 grit, for example, and I'd run it across there 10 times or so, and then I'd pull the burr, and I'd feel it, and maybe I need to pull it one more time, and it'd be sharp, and then I'd go to this, and then you're ready to go. But that was a time-consuming part for me. Was just cutting through it.
A 5-minute deal.
Yeah. Oh,
now you're a 5-minute.
I know what to look for now because I've spent all that time sharpening. But just don't get discouraged if you're trying to get one of them sharp and you know you're not feeling a burr. You got to keep going.
I put a video on my channel called Broadhead Sharpening Hack, and where I encourage you to use a crappy knife that you have laying in your drawer from Sears or whatever and just destroy it. Do this with a double bevel cheap knife that you can chunk in the trash and nobody cares about. We've all got them.
Right.
Laying around in every drawer, there's some garbage knife that's orange and terrible steel. But if you play with that, it's super soft and the blade will move around a lot, and all your frustration, you just go throw that in the trash, go get the next one. You know, somebody gave you the freebie or whatever. So look at that if you get frustrated. That's why I put that up there. A lot of people say, well, that's not broadhead sharpening. I'm like, I understand that, but you could break something as opposed to spend $100 on a set of broadheads and then you ruin one. Because it is possible to wear the edge so weird that it's literally like this and it's gone. I mean, it's a shooter, so you can always just shoot it and use it for practice.
Yep.
Look that up, and then also in the description below they'll have the link to the video from last year. And we covered double bevels more.
Yeah, if you're wanting to get into this stuff, this is sort of a Broadhead Sharpening 2.0 video where we've, you know, addressed some of the, I don't know what you would call it, some of the finer details of sharpening.
Absolutely.
Which you need to take into account. But if you're trying to just learn the basics of how to get your edge set on these, watch the video from last year.
The only other thing is, go back to the video, we say this, but when you're sharpening a double bevel head, it's the classic, you know, every knife on earth or whatever has a bevel on one side and a bevel on the other, okay? It's more like, this is not going to be equivalent, but that's what a double bevel looks like, right? Edges on both sides, that's the normal stuff. You're going to want to keep the strokes pretty even. You're talking 5 and 5 and 5 and 5 and back and forth. With a single bevel, you literally cut the bevel through. You work on this side of the broadhead over and over. It'll cut through, the burr will flip over, and then you just peel it off this side 2 or 3 strokes. But don't wear out the flat side. Just use it to get this bevel perfectly beautiful. And that's that. I think we covered Sharpening 2.0. Hey, watch for the series that we did with Mr. Barnett. We covered a lot of cool details, and the thing that has stuck out for me was the armor thing.
We discussed kinetic energy, what it means, how to measure it, different distances. We discussed armor on your target, what that means as far as penetrating through it. We discussed momentum and what that means. We discussed arrow flight, arrow stability.
We shot the gun today?
We shot the arrow gun. We've done a bunch of stuff.
Thanks for watching.
Go follow the range fairy. Check him out. He's nice enough to bring us down here and let us shoot pigs.
Yeah, we're having
for 2 years in a row. We're having a good time.
It's hot, but the mosquitoes didn't show up. So if you go hunting somewhere, there's a lot of mosquitoes, and you hear these guys are going to show up, just go hunting because there's not going to be any mosquitoes. So we will see you later.
They're afraid of Ted. They don't want no part of him.